Hey everyone, you hear it everywhere, right? This talk about democracy being in trouble, about new digital threats undermining our way of life. But what if the playbook everyone's so worried about isn't new at all? What if it's ancient? Today, we're diving into a really powerful argument that the methods of control we see today are just a high-tech version of a very, very old problem. Let's get into it. This quote right here, this is the key to everything we're talking about today. It makes this incredibly bold claim. The biggest threat isn't just hiding the truth, it's replacing it entirely with a carefully constructed fake. This idea, the active creation of a managed reality, is the core of what we're going to unpack. Okay, so if you've been following the conversation around democratic backsliding, you've probably heard this term, authoritarian informationalism. It's the go-to concept for describing how modern regimes are using all our digital tools, surveillance, algorithms, social media manipulation, to systematically control what we see and think. And look, the theory is solid. It frames this as a uniquely modern threat, something born out of our digital age. And our source material agrees this is a huge, urgent problem. But it asks a really critical question. Are we actually looking at a new form of control, or are we just looking at new tools for a very, very old game? And that's where we get to the heart of today's explainer. The source we're looking at proposes that what we're seeing right now is just the latest version of a playbook that goes back for centuries. It's an ancient architecture of control designed to manage what people know, and maybe more importantly, what they don't know. To really get a handle on this timeless phenomenon, the source gives us a new word, informationalism. And notice the spelling there. This isn't just about the flow of information. No, this is something much darker. It's the deliberate, systematic act of replacing real, useful knowledge with a counterfeit designed to keep a power structure in place. So how does this informationalism actually work? Well, it works through something the source calls eugenic epistemology. I know, it sounds super academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's about controlling the very rules of knowledge. An elite group gets to decide who counts as an expert, what counts as a fact, and how that information is allowed to get out. And when you look at it on a timeline like this, wow, the scale of this thing is just massive. From ancient scribes who literally controlled who could read and write, all the way to today's digital landscape, the fundamental pattern is the same. This suggests it's not some new bug in our modern system. It's a recurring feature of how power has always protected itself. Okay, theory is one thing, but to really get this, we need to see it in action. So let's look at two absolutely incredible stories from history that show exactly how this works, how a clear, life-saving signal gets completely drowned out by institutional noise. I want you to picture this. It's 1847, Vienna General Hospital. In the maternity wards run by the doctors and medical students, the mortality rate from something called childbed fever could be as high as 35%. Think about that. More than 1 in 3 women were dying simply because they were in the care of physicians. It's horrifying. But then, a doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis comes along. He notices that the doctors are going straight from performing autopsies to delivering babies. He presents a clear, data-backed signal, his intervention. It was so simple. Just wash your hands in a chlorinated lime solution. And the result? Staggering doesn't even begin to cover it. The mortality rate absolutely plummeted, down to below 2%. The data was undeniable. Semmelweis had found the truth. He'd found the corrective signal. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Wrong. And this is the part you really need to hear. The medical establishment rejected his findings, not because the evidence was weak, but because the implication was intolerable. It meant that they, the esteemed gentlemen physicians, were the carriers of death. And instead of accepting that terrible truth, they clung to the counterfeit, to the noise of old theories, all to protect their own dignity. And in doing so, they completely destroyed Semmelweis' career. All right, let's jump to our second case, which shows how this whole cycle evolves. This time, it's not about a life or death situation, but about a revolutionary new way to organize knowledge itself. It's 1869, and a chemist named Dmitri Mendeleev proposes the periodic law. A new way to organize the elements that didn't just make sense of what they knew, but could actually predict things they hadn't even discovered yet. And his story shows us the full 4-step cycle perfectly. First, the signal is rejected outright. The establishment dismisses his idea. Second, you go after the messenger. They discredit him, deny him membership in the academy. Then, and here's the really sneaky part, when the evidence becomes so overwhelming it can't be ignored, the correction is just quietly absorbed. And finally, the history of that resistance gets completely erased, and Mendeleev is celebrated like a hero as if they were on his side all along. So what does all this 19th century drama have to do with your social media feed today? Everything. Because these stories give us a brand new way to understand what's happening right now. They show us that power has always worked by setting a kind of ceiling on public knowledge. This chart lays it all out, and it's super clear. Back in ancient times, that knowledge ceiling was literal. Most people just couldn't read. Then, in the early modern era, it got more sophisticated. It became technical. Sure, you could read, but you couldn't access or understand the expert data. And now, today, the ceiling is contextual. We are drowning in information, but we often lack the critical frameworks to tell the real signal from all the institutional noise. And that brings us right back to the central conclusion of this whole explainer. What we call authoritarian informationalism, all the digital surveillance and algorithmic manipulation, it isn't some new monster. It is simply a high-tech digital recalibration of a knowledge ceiling that has always been there. So what do we do about it? Well, the argument here is that if we only focus on fighting the latest apps or algorithms, we're always going to be one step behind. A real, durable response has to be anchored in timeless principles. We have to focus on fostering deep critical thinking, on demanding access to the raw, unmediated facts, and on building institutions that actually protect the dissenters, the people like Semmelweis, who deliver that crucial corrective signal. And that really leaves us with a huge question to think about. The printing press didn't end this cycle, and it's clear the internet isn't going to either. So if the tools for managing ignorance are always changing, always adapting, what are the fundamental, enduring practices that can actually defend truth against power?